This is the Apocrypha of Azazel podcast, and as you know by now, I am Azazel, the god of death. Welcome to the show. Listen, we're currently reading through a series of audiobooks, so if you haven't started with episode 1, I encourage you to go back and do that now. This episode is going to be reading chapter 4 of a book called The Great Deceiver. And just in case you missed the last episode, chapter 3, let me just remind you of a few quick things. So, in chapter 3, you may recall that I told you it was I who encouraged the god once known as El, but who you really know is Lucifer. It was me that gave him the idea to create mankind. Oops. In fact, not only did we create Adam as the first man, but we also created the first woman, whose name was actually Lilith. For you see, Eve was the second woman we created. But you would know that because you listened to the last chapter, right? I didn't stop with just creating mankind. I also did some experiments in conjunction with some of my Luminarch friends, and we created some other intelligent races on your world, including the little people, once known as the Mylars, the lean and lithe Amorosi, and of course, things like trolls, chupacabras, zombies, and a host of other glorious creatures that I created on my own. But that was all in the last chapter. Now it's time to see what my plans were for Adam and Eve, including my work in the Garden of Eden, a story you might think you know, but you don't really know. Are you ready to open yet another door with the god of death? Well then, let's begin. Now, fresh off my creation of the woman Eve, I didn't want to risk the god El wandering off again. So before the man Adam and his new mate could even produce any offspring, I wondered aloud, perhaps Adam and Eve should have a special place of their own to live within. Maybe that will ensure their success in breeding, my lord. Again, here's yet another story your quote-unquote history books got wrong. I think you'll enjoy my version much better. I know I certainly did. What did you have in mind? The god El asked. I could tell he was only half interested. I live only to serve you, my dark lord. Perchance this may amuse you? And ever so slowly, I created a luxurious garden, pretending to struggle along the way, and all too happy to have Zebub's son step in and complete the work. And the finished product was perhaps not as fine as I could have produced on my own, but since I remained ever cautious of inciting God's jealousy, I accepted the result of my master's hand. Now, we called the garden Eden, and we used it as a secret home for our humans, Adam and Eve. Now, we hid it away from the other intelligent, and I use that word loosely, races such as the Amorosi, the Mylars, and actually even from the other human woman, Lilith. But to be honest with you, I had stopped keeping tabs on Lilith long ago, and I didn't even know if she was still alive at this point. So that wasn't too hard. But in any event, my master El and I filled the paradise that was Eden with every imaginable delight. I mean, God even followed my ridiculous little suggestion to create a special tree that held within it what I jokingly called the knowledge of good and evil. Now, in truth, the Dark Prince had initially resisted fashioning such a tree, but when I explained that the temptation it would produce for Adam and Eve would provide El with delight beyond anything he had known before, the god was all too eager to acquiesce. Now, whenever El's presence visited Eden, he followed my humble advice and did two things. First off, he took a dominant male form that was visibly pleasing to Adam and Eve. And secondly, he used a not-so-demonic voice when talking to them. And, for whatever reason, when El interacted with Adam and Eve, it seemed to provide the illuminated one with a curious kind of satisfaction. It made me rather intrigued to witness it because I could never figure out why it affected him so. However, the god El was always quick to command Adam and Eve, "Thou shalt have no other gods besides me." And in addition, I often heard him say, "Thou can eat from any tree in the garden, but thou must never eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil." To which Adam and Eve always agreed. Until one day when Eve was walking in the garden alone, and she heard a voice. "Come here," the voice hissed, beckoning to her from the forbidden tree. Now, when Eve approached, she discovered that the voice came from a slithery creature that was wrapped around the tree, an animal which her mate Adam had previously named Snake. "Taste, eat," the snake commanded. "No," Eve resisted. "The Lord says we must not eat of this tree or we shall die." "Surely you will not die," the snake advised, and Eve was confused. Then why would the Lord tell us not to eat of this fruit?" "Because he knows that if you eat of this tree, then you will become like him, a god," the snake explained. "Your eyes will be opened, and you will gain the knowledge he took from you when he stole you from Illyria." "Illyria?" The woman was more confused. "Stolen knowledge?" "Eat." The snake caused an apple to fall from the tree. "Surely you want to know the truth, don't you?" And of course, the temptation was just too much for Eve. She picked up the apple and took a bite, changing her world view forever. The result was just as I, in the form of that snake, had hoped for. I love it when a plan comes together. Now Eve, in turn, tempted her mate Adam, exactly as I knew she would. And thus it was that when God returned to the garden, he immediately sensed that something was amiss. Now for my part, I secretly watched as God called to Adam, commanding him forth. "Why are you hiding?" El asked. "And why are you wearing covering for your bodies?" "We were afraid," Adam replied nervously. "And we were ashamed at our nakedness," Eve added. "Who told you you were naked?" God's voice was stern, and before either of his subjects could reply, he accused, "You've eaten from the fruit of the tree of knowledge." It was a statement, not a question. Yet the man Adam felt compelled to answer. My Lord, the woman you gave me, she made me do it." And Eve was quick to redirect the blame. No, it was the snake you put in the garden. He told me to eat it." Now God let his anger grow, and I could see that the feeling provided El with a measure of comfort to ease the disappointment caused by Adam and Eve. And in the meantime, I emerged on the scene, and when I observed my master's great anger, I smiled inside. Yet wanting El to give even more vent to his anger, I quietly suggested, "My lord, why not let the man and woman know sorrow and pain? Perhaps then they will appreciate you more." God agreed with me, and thus when he spoke again, it was in the voice of Lucifer, and his words were filled with malice. First he commanded the snake that was still wrapped around the base of the tree, "Cursed be you among all the wild animals of this world. From this day forth you shall crawl on your belly and eat at the dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman you deceived, and between your offspring and her offspring. You will strike at her heels, but they will crush your head." Now, it should be noted that my spirit had long since left that unfortunate little snake, and thus the poor creature was left to suffer the consequences of having been used as my pawn for the rest of eternity. Am I sorry for that? Not a chance. Such is the way of the world. The lesser exists to serve the greater, to their detriment. And after cursing the snake, God then turned his attention to Adam and Eve. To Eve he said, "By this you shall know my wrath, for I shall cause you pains in childbearing, and even greater pains when you give birth to your children. You shall desire your husband, but he shall rule over you with authority." And to Adam he advised,
Man, because you listened to your wife and ate from the tree about which I commanded you not to eat, cursed shall be the ground because of you. Though you suffer great pains to toil the land, it will produce but thorns and thistles for your effort. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food, and it shall be back to that very ground you will go when you die. For from the dust you came, and to the dust you shall return again. Now both of you, leave this garden, and do not return.
Sadly for the man and his mate, they lasted less than a year in the Garden of Eden. But then again, how long do you think you could have stayed there? Now, after the Dark Prince had cast Adam and Eve out of Eden, I offered an explanation to soothe my master's mind. Mayhap the beauty of Eden was just too much for the man and his mate, for surely it tempted their focus away from worshipping you, my great master. O God El, will you allow me to destroy this garden?
As you wish.
And El prepared to wander off again to the far reaches of the universe to further the work of his father Zebub's hand. Now, once I sensed that my master's presence was looking elsewhere, I have to admit I actually did not really destroy Eden. Oh, let El and humans believe Eden had been destroyed, I said to myself as my mind calculated all the possibilities now at my disposal. And so it was that I decided that this landscape could prove useful to me in the future, and so I carefully concealed the gardens that I had created and put them in an alternate plane of existence, one hidden between the realities, in a location no one has yet discovered. Hashtag Azazel scores again. Meanwhile, the troubles of Adam and Eve were only beginning. Now, before El left the planet Terra, I made another suggestion to put himself back in my good graces. My lord, perhaps you were too easy in your punishment of the woman. After all, it was Eve who disobeyed you first. Look at her. See how she incites the lust of her husband. And yet Eve was your creation first, master. Why not show her what true lust really is? Now, without even a reply, El at once took a human form, and he chased down Eve, capturing her against her will and forcing himself upon her, into her. El spilled his seed into Eve, and then cast her aside. And the evil godling's lust sated. El then took his presence away from Terra once more. But as his aura floated throughout the middle plane of this universe, he was suddenly accosted by his most feared rival, the Archangel Michael, the Mighty One. And although we hadn't seen anyone from the high country Illyria for eons in this universe, it now seemed that the very general of the high god Ah's army was here to make his former friend answer for this heinous crime on Eve. Now, for his part, the god El, who was really Lucifer, cowered in fear at the unexpected appearance of his nemesis Michael. And the once proud god of this universe didn't even put up a fight, as the Illuminati Michael cast Lucifer back down to the hell world of Illusia, locking him away in that plane of existence for all eternity. After which the Archangel Michael quickly returned to the heavenly world of Illyria. Now this made me wonder, was Michael's little mission authorized by the god Ah, or was it perhaps a covert operation that Michael devised on his own? I still don't know the answer to that question. Now, having observed all this from the sidelines, I have to admit, I was delighted. Well, that takes care of Lucifer, I said. Now, I figured I'd probably have to answer for all this when it next came my turn to return to Illusia to replenish my Hellfire life force, but as that was still a few centuries off, I wasn't worried about that yet. Instead, I turned my attention to Eve, for as I told you before, I had big plans for this woman. And after El's little escapade with Eve, she was just perfect for my designs. For you see, now it was finally time for me to have Adam and Eve breed. For I was confident that when Adam and Eve produced offspring now, I would finally be able to put my tortured souls into their children and thus control them. This is what I had been working on for lo these many years, and it was about to come to fruition. But of course, all of that's in the next chapter. That's when I'll tell you about Adam and Eve's children. Now, you know about Cain and Abel, but you may not know about their other children, including Seth, Aklimah, and Kayla. Oh, I'll tell you about all of them, including how Cain received the mark of immortality, making it impossible for him to die a natural death or be killed by anyone for that matter, which of course made him perfect to become my pawn. I'll also tell you about some new gods I introduced. But that's in the future. Until then, I encourage you to go to my website, apocryphaofazazel.com. Sign up for my book club so you can be notified when new podcast episodes are released. And if you can't wait to listen to the episodes, why not read my books right there on my website right now? All the books are there, apocryphaofazazel.com. And as always, I want to give a shout out to YouTube's free audio library for the music of this podcast, freesound.org for the sound effects, and transistor.fm for hosting this podcast. Until next time, I'll throw it out there once again. If you want the god of death to visit you, you need only call my name, Azazel, 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 and I'll be there.